sort of in the same, sphere of Khabib as obviously Nate Diaz, I would say, just because I could see that fight materializing in some form. But first, Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal is next, according to Ariel Helwani, and Dana White later confirmed to Brett Okamoto. So let's break down this news a little bit, Ant, and because let's be honest.
I thought the UFC was going to screw it up.
We did.
It just like no way. This makes too much sense. The noise about Usman versus Covington kind of falling apart, and Masvidal tweeting out to everyone else at welterweight who wanted some smoke and all that other stuff. Like, I really thought they were going to screw up Diaz versus Masvidal. So I'm glad they got that right.
Let me read the series of events per Ariel Helwani, because it is quite funny what they try to do to Usman. The fight got finalized yesterday afternoon, and Dana White just confirmed it to Brett Okamoto. They tried to originally make it a couple of weeks ago, but were far apart on numbers. Not surprising. Then they tried to book Usman versus Covington, but negotiations stalled with Covington. Then they tried to do Usman versus Masvidal, but after Masvidal agreed, they couldn't come to terms with Usman. In fact, things got so bad with Usman that they threatened to strip him and pulled all his guest fighter duties in Abu Dhabi. At that point, they reached out to Leon Edwards to see if he can do a vacant title fight versus Masvidal. Those talks didn't get very far because in the midst of all that, around Wednesday night, talks reignited with Diaz. By Thursday night, it was looking very promising. And then after a tense day of negotiations, the deal was done. 5-round main event, no title except for the Baz motherfucker title, and it's MSG. Also, same day as Canelo Kovalev. We're going to talk about that as well in a second, if you want, Ant, if you're like.
Definitely wouldn't mind talking about that one. Aren't they making an actual baddest motherfucker belt now too, right?
Yes, but first, the series of events that we hear about, them threatening to strip Usman, make Masvidal Leon Edwards for a vacant belt. Thoughts on all of this? The series of events that led us to Diaz Masvidal 5-round pay-per-view main event in MSG. And by the way, I'm so happy about that. But Ant, the series of events we have to get there, your thoughts on it?
Now, one thing that we, maybe not me and you or other people in the media and that comment and follow this stuff on a regular basis, but a lot of times the UFC is able to set the narrative of who's being difficult in negotiations and who's ducking who and whatnot based on whatever information they leak to their favorite reporter of the week. And that's how this thing normally goes, and fight announcements that get made before the fights are actually signed, and all sorts of tactics that the UFC has to pressure people into falling in line with negotiations. So with that being said, it calls into question this entire welterweight fiasco that we've had since Tyron Woodley knocked out Robbie Lawler. Because since then, it's been a constant ring of fuckery. It's been, okay, Woodley's ducking this guy. Well, he's holding out for Diaz. Well, now now George St. Pierre is coming back, but now we're gonna make Masvidal. They've had so many different iterations of welterweight title fights since Woodley knocked out Robbie Lawler, and in every case, the UFC always finds a way to make the fighter look like the bad one, to make the fighter look like they're ducking or they're being too difficult. We see Colby Covington getting his chance for undisputed belt taken away from him twice. He wanted nose surgery because he just fought a 5-rounder. There's so many different things that have gone wrong with this, that now seeing this come to fruition, it's like, yeah, if you just paid the guys what they asked for, or you negotiate with them for better offers, and you just honor the commitments that you've already made, maybe these things just happen. Maybe these fights fall into place. Maybe when the entire world is begging for Diaz versus Masvidal, you just fucking make it. Maybe when you give someone, and Colby Covington, an interim belt, maybe you just honor that and let the guy fight the the actual champion. Perhaps.
I want smoke.
I agree with everything you're saying. I mean, this is a classic Dana White UFC story of negotiation fuckery, to use your word exactly, which by the way, fantastic word.
Thank you.
I will add to that. It's one of the best words ever made. And you got to feel for a guy like Usman here, who is obviously the successor to Woodley's legacy in a way. It feels like he's going to be pigeonholed into that. You know, he's going to be he's the next African American black fighter in that division that's the champion. He's outspoken in a lot of ways and clearly has a sense of value or self-value that runs into conflict with the UFC's perception of him and just fighters overall. Right? If you want to hear more on that, definitely check out me and Anthony's video earlier this week about the UFC antitrust hearing. I'm of the mind that Usman is going to be connected with these types of stories for as long as he's a champion. I'll be honest. I just think it's par for the course now. You know, John Jones gets away with it because he makes them so much money that the UFC kind of at this point shuts up. Right?
Yeah, because they don't really, with John Jones, they don't really have much of a choice.
Yeah.
They are so starved for stars, for genuine stars, and Usman isn't there yet. And probably with his fight style, probably won't ever get there, no matter how good of a champion he proves to be. Just his personality and the way he fights probably won't reach that level, at least in the U.S. I mean, I think if you play the Nigerian immigrant angle, as MMA has a bigger presence in Africa, from that perspective, but from the perspective of the run-of-the-mill North American fan that's watching this stream right now, no, Kamaru Usman is probably not going to be the next star, or even the gateway to a market like Tyron Woodley would have been had he been given the proper push.
I agree completely. It's just, again, curious to see Usman's career going forward and the relationship with the UFC, because I do think it's going to be a rocky one going forward. But circling back to Diaz Masvidal pay-per-view main event, they got it right. The UFC got it right for this matchup, and kudos to them in a sense for somehow not fucking this one up. But even though they tried and seemingly every single occasion to mess this one up, at least they didn't. Thank you. Finally.
You know what? Maybe we shouldn't be congratulating the UFC on not fucking it up. Maybe we should just acknowledge that they fell upward, because the way this played out publicly, they tried to fuck it up. They tried to mess this up as much as possible, and somehow or another, it still came together. It came together by accident. Yeah, That's what it sounds like to me.
I'll put it this way. Thank you, MMA gods, for not letting the UFC fuck this up.
Yes.
Knock on wood. You guys have messed with us a lot over the years. We apologize. We've made sacrifices to you. It's all come to fruition now. We got Diaz versus Masvidal, the pay-per-view main event in MSG, so you know it's going to have all the New York media tour and buzz that's going to be attached to it. I am insanely curious to see not only, of course, the matchup in and of itself, because I do think it's a competitive, fun matchup. We saw Nate Diaz that had arguably his career best performance against Anthony Pettis just a month or so ago. And Masvidal had a historic knockout win against Ben Askren, again, a couple months ago. So the hype for this fight within the community is huge. But it seems like those two guys are trending upwards and transcending the market and the industry. And this is the first time, really, we get to see what they do, what they really draw, even though the combination probably might lead to a bigger increase than, let's say, a Diaz versus kind of a nobody, or a guy that doesn't really draw, or Masvidal versus a guy that doesn't really draw. But these are two guys that historically have never gotten a push from the UFC, are not pay-per-view draws, are not champions even. They're main eventing a card, a pay-per-view card with each other. Let's see how big of stars they are. And I know even in this paradigm, it's hard to say that because all pay-per-views are ESPN Plus. The lack of marketing, I would say, overall for pay-per-views by the UFC, because they get a flat check from ESPN for all of these pay-per-views, is a big reason why a lot of these cards have failed in terms of buy rates. But this card, no matter what, is going to do a decent number, in my opinion. We're going to see that they are good draws as fighters, as prize fighters. And I can't wait to see them, use that against the UFC. Cannot wait for that.
Yeah, because one thing that's very crucial about this fight is that this is the fight that both of these guys wanted. Just like when Diaz fought Pettis, this is a fight that Team Diaz and Team Pettis brought to the UFC and proposed, and the UFC just signed the check and let it happen. So with Masvidal and Diaz campaigning for this fight and being very vocal about it and making it very clear, they weren't gonna take any kind of fight for any kind of money. Mm-hmm. They wanted each other or title fights, and they want top dollar, and they weren't budging, and it happened. So this shows what happens when fighters come together. Now, the last good opportunity the fighters had for this, two fighters separately coming together and making something happen, despite what the UFC wants, was Conor McGregor and Cowboy Cerrone. And they both wanted that fight. And Conor insisted on a main event, and Cowboy, for whatever reason, was on Twitter just saying, just sign the damn contract, when they were trying to make it a 3-round co-main event, which would have been less money. So Cowboy shot that one down. Cowboy played into the UFC's interest in that. But now you see, and that what would have been a great fight, a pay-per-view worthy main event without a title, gone by the wayside. So now you see when the fighters stick together and they decide these are the terms we want and we're not accepting anything less, this is what happens. And everybody's happy because the UFC may be protesting. They may have very begrudgingly slid those bout offers across the table, but they'll be very happy to cash that check when it happens.
Agreed. And again, it harkens back to when Diaz was in his post-fight presser, post-Pettis, right? And somebody asked him, I forget who it was exactly, and asked him, hey, Dana White was just did his presser, and he said, you finally moved the needle. He admitted that. And Diaz kind of smirked himself and said, he shouldn't have said that. He should not have said, he should not have admitted that.